we can get started. So welcome everyone to the February 21st, 2023 meeting of the Housing and Community Development Committee. We have a quorum. Shall we introduce Lindsay first, and then we'll get started with our business?
That would be great. So everybody, we have on this call tonight, Lindsay Wade. She is the newest team member of the Housing and Grant team. She's joining us as the Housing and Economic Development Analyst. She is essentially backfilling my previous role and will be handling mostly handling the CDBG grant as well as other projects. She's been with her team for, I believe, 3 weeks now. And we are very excited that she is joining us.
I bet. Yeah. Well, welcome, Lindsay. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Okay. So I guess would someone first move suspension of the rules to allow us to meet virtually?
I move that we suspend the rules to meet virtually.
Second.
Okay, thanks. And a quick roll call on that.
Sure. Monica Bobo.
Hi.
Lauren Berlin.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez.
Aye.
Joanne Salome.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
And Councilmember Heracariz.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Great, thank you. And another quick motion to approve the minutes of our January 17th meeting.
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, and another quick roll call.
Monica Bobo.
Aye.
Lauren Berlin.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez.
Sorry about that.
Joanne Salome.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
And Councilmember Heracariz.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, and Councilmember Burns has joined us. So we're all here. Then first main item on our agenda is public comment, and I guess we have several people signed up.
Yes, actually, we have a few more since I last gave you an update. We have 6 people signed up so far. If anybody else would like to provide public comment, please raise your hand with the icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll let you provide public comments. The first person is Jacqueline Zaracoria. And Ms. Zarak, you should be able to provide public comment.
Hi, I actually submitted a written comment, although I'm happy to read them if you guys didn't get them. I had 2 primary suggestions, both around the Evanston RLTO suggestions.
Okay.
So like I said, my name's Jacqueline Corey. I actually have my 1-year-old with me, so if you hear a baby, that is why. So I work, she's waving. I work at the network. The network is a collaborative membership dedicated to improving the lives of those impacted by gender-based violence. We also run the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. So when I learned that Evanston was considering changes to its landlord tenant ordinance, I thought of kind of 2 really constructive changes that would help survivors of gender-based violence and really make a difference for survivors that are renters in the city of Evanston. And so, like I said, there's 2 changes that I'm proposing. The first one is a change to the rental agreement prohibitions in the ordinance. And for that one, I'm proposing that Evanston prohibit that a rental agreement that limits a tenant's right to contact law enforcement or emergency assistance, or any agreement that creates penalties for a tenant for contacting law enforcement or emergency assistance. That change is consistent with the new changes under the Violence Against Women Act, the reauthorization 2022. It's also consistent to be clear, that change under the Violence Against Women Act covers all of Evanston because it receives funding from the Community Development Block Grant. That change would also be consistent with Illinois Public Act 09904441, which is a similar protection around crime-free ordinances and being allowed to contact the police and emergency services. So that's kind of the first proposal that I have. The second one is that when Evanston's looking at an ordinance, I'd ask that it include as an addition to the retaliatory conduct section that a landlord cannot retaliate against a tenant if a tenant exercises rights under the Illinois Safe Homes Act. I see that a lot in my day-to-day work. I would say on a weekly basis, there's issues where someone tries to terminate their lease or get their locks changed, which are permissible under Illinois law, under the Safe Homes Act. However, there's often retaliation once that happens. A lot of times security deposits aren't returned after someone terminates their lease, even though it's a lawful termination. I also see termination of tenancy, non-renewal of lease after someone requests for a lock change. So those types of actions are directly adverse to the purpose of the Safe Homes Act, but it also causes survivors of gender-based violence to experience economic distress when trying to leave violent situations. So I think that would be a big change. It would be a small change to the law, but it would have a big effect for survivors of gender-based violence. So happy to answer any questions, but those are my comments.
Okay, great. And you submitted that also in an email?
Yeah, so that should be, I submitted it through the Google form, so I hope everyone received it, but if
Yes.
you didn't, I can submit it again.
I have the Google form with the written comments, so I'll be able to share them with the committee by email after the meeting. And what I'll do for the other written comment is I can read them.
Okay, thank you so much. I
well.
really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the next few comments are going to be written comment that I can go quickly over. We have Henry Fulkerson that shared that as an affordable housing advocate from Oak Park, I've been inspired by the great work done in Evanston around inclusionary housing and other affordable housing issue, and strongly recommend that you adopt a just cause for eviction amendment to your current RLTO. We have Sharon Cargile, who thinks that tenants should have a longer term residency. Tenants that have a longer term residency deserve to have more time to move or adjust if their lease is not renewed. 30 days notice for a long-term tenant is not enough time in today's housing market. We have CJ O'Hara that is supporting giving more time for a longer term resident to move and also moving assistance if needed for shorter time to move when the lease is not renewed. 30 days is outdated and does not help the community at large very much. Those are the three people that chose to provide written comment. We also have two additional person that would like to provide public comment. And we have Carlos Sutton, who I believe is on the call.
Okay.
Mr. Sutton, I think you should be able to provide your public comment.
Good evening, members of the Housing Commission. I have three concerns that I want to identify in your deliberations. One, and more important, I do not see my alley listed in the 1800 block on Darrow for repairs. You tore my alley up in September. You did not contact me about any kinds of further work. There's some kind of problem, what you said, that you don't have permission from ComEd to complete the work. And then the subsequent of putting blacktop down rather than concrete alley, which I haven't seen any other alley in Evanston with that kind. Right now, as I go out to pull my garbage cans out, I have to pull them through about ankle deep water that's behind my property. And I've consistently called the city about this problem that has not been adjusted. The alley was supposed to have been one of the alleys that were paved under the transfer station settlement. You've gotten all the alleys within a block of my house. You have not made any plans. It's not on the record date to complete the construction or paving of my alley. Secondly, I was very concerned that you members of a committee would afford $4 million to a proposed development that has not passed the Plan Commission or even out of the City Council. I think it's premature, and you should be very, very deliberate about giving developers money to assist them in projects that they don't have the resources of themselves, relying on government funds and relying on our city taxpayers' money for their own developments. And third, and most important, your landlord new laws are the most draconian and punitive that I've ever seen. You make no allotment for absentee landlords who consistently appear in front of the commission for violations. You do not identify the number of units that landlord should be applicable to. Small landlords like me are doing everything we can to maintain our properties. We get no support from these agencies when they destroy our property, bring in bed bugs, and then you get on us about not giving them notice and not giving them their security deposits back. I think you should bring more balance into this discussion, and you should eliminate small landlords and have a maximum number of units before you even start discussing these new laws that apply to landlords. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Miss Payton, who would also like to provide comments.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. When you go in person, I hope that you could possibly do hybrid meetings and that these meetings will continue to be recorded in person. The new landlord tenant ordinance only benefits the tenant. To me, you should not vote if you are not or never have been a landlord that rents to HUD tenants. Now, I don't know some of you very well. I do know that Joanne Zalomi at one time has had rental property, and she would rent to HUD tenants. So she may speak about her experiences. You do not understand my plight if you have not been in my situation. Why aren't the tenants required to possess renter's insurance? I spoke with Ike Ogbo, and he feels same way. I was at the fire that occurred a couple of months ago, or maybe a month ago, on Emerson Street. And the tenant said he was smoking weed and he dropped his incense, and that's why the place was on fire. Now, that landlord is without an apartment or income, and we have to put that on our insurance. When is it the tenant's responsible? It's always the tenant, the poor tenant, this and that, while they're burning down our place, tearing up our units, and we don't get help. What about the penalty to the tenant? I have a building that's non-smoking, and the tenant still smokes. And the agency, the city, and the tenant swear it's not happening, and it happens all the time, and get penalized. They bring in pets. I have a no pet policy. Do they get penalized? No, they don't. They let extra people move into their apartment, and they're not on the lease. And I've been consistently cursed out by the tenant and their guests. And where is the penalty on those people? They have furniture, bed bugs all over the hallways, garbage that I have to pay my maintenance man to clean up on a weekly basis. It's not okay for tenants to get away with damages, back rent, threatening landlords, which has happened to me. Has anybody stood up and said, thank you, Tina, for taking tenants that are bankrupt, that are homeless, that have large families? No, you just give me a code violation or stab me in the back. I had a shooting at my building, and Chair Revelle knows about it. No one has stood up and said anything about it. The mayor promised me help. I have gone all over the city for help, and I don't get anything. I have an empty building because I have $50,000 worth of damages. And this little fund you're talking about helping tenants with damages, well, let's start with me. Write me a check for $50,000. I bet you won't do that. And what about retaliation, I heard the person talk about it. How about the retaliation against the landlord? Chair Revelle saw the girl curse me out and threaten me with bodily harm in front of the police. What about that? No one is saying anything about that. What about the 10 days notice? Doesn't Chicago have a 5-day notice? And you're saying you're copying them and so forth. These are just outrageous. And you're sitting up here, and if you have not ever rented your place to HUD tenants, then you should not be voting on anything. You sit here and make these laws, and you want us to follow them, and you're not putting any penalty on the tenant. How do you think that you're going to get more affordable units? By making more rules for the landlord? That you have lost a lot of landlords, small landlords like myself, who have been providing units for over 50 years. Hundreds of families on HUD, Connections for the Homeless, Section 8, Center of Concern, Catholic Charities, Trilogy. Who do you have right now? Luxury housing at 50% AMI? They don't even have to take these programs. So I suggest you consult someone who is actually trying to do something in this community, like landlords like me, before you start passing judgment and rules for us to follow, because soon you will not have anybody taking these programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody else?
No, I believe this was the last comment for this week.
Okay.
And Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I can do it either as a public commenter or do it as a committee member, as to create no additional confusion around the alley that was mentioned by one of the commenters. I wanted to respond.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Burns.
Thank you, Chair. And so I sent Carlos you an email back on December 13th, 2022. If I need a different email, please send it to me. But I said we were just told by Laura Biggs, this was after you hopped off the call, during the HCDC committee, that there is a construction delay on the alley by your home because of an unforeseen issue that ComEd is addressing. Due to that unforeseen event and supply chain issues affecting material availability, construction will resume in the spring. Laura said that staff will make sure that everyone knows where to put their garbage cans and that the alley is cleared out. Laura, please correct any errors that I've made. I'll work with staff to send a comprehensive update out to you and the residents shortly. Thanks for your patience, and let me know if you have any additional questions or concerns. So Carlos, I sent that to you December 13th, 2022. And then on December 30th, I sent a follow-up to staff saying, has a letter updating the residents about the progress of this alley improvement been sent out. On June 3rd, our Deputy City Manager, David Stoneback, responded saying the newsletter was distributed on December 15th. Staff have already had contact with a couple of community members since its release. So that's all the updates. I do agree, and I did communicate this to staff that this notice should have been out well in advance. I found out during our last call that there was an issue with the alley, and those were the steps that I took after I found out. That is all, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for, I was hoping someone would bring us up to speed on where we were with the alley, so that's great. Oops, and has Carlos left already?
No, he's still showing as an attendee. There's just two different participant lists and one for the audience.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, well, we have several meaty discussions ahead of us this evening. The first one is to talk about potential changes to our landlord tenants ordinance. And there's sort of two parts to the discussion. One is sort of a list of about 10 changes that we could make that would be relatively straightforward. They echo changes that I guess have been made, for example, in Chicago. And then there's a series of, oh good, here we go. A series of basically new types of changes that we could make to our ordinance that I think are going to warrant more in-depth discussion from us. So staff, why don't I turn it over to you?
Sure. And so Lindsay is going to be presenting this part. And Anna, if you're able to move back up to the beginning of the presentation. I also wanted to mention that Lindsay is going to give a quick update because a lot of this information is already on the memo. But we also have Jonathan Raffer-Springer from the Law Center for Better Housing that is in the audience currently, that is here to support or provide any kind of deeper context on some of the question that might be a little more complex. And I believe Dom Vaz from Open Communities may have been able to make it. He was planning on joining, but had some challenges. He is the Associate Director of Fair Housing at Open Communities and also able to jump in for deeper context if there's some of the conversation points from the committee that need a little bit more feedback or input from those two organizations. Lindsay, I think you can go ahead.
Hi, everybody. In case you missed me earlier, I'm Lindsay Wade. I'm the new Housing and Economic Development Analyst with the Housing and Grants team. And I'm going on my 4th week as a part of this team. And it's going great. And I've had a lot of fun working on this project. Over the past couple of weeks. So I'm going to talk with you guys about some potential updates that we want you all to consider making to Evanston's residential landlord tenant ordinance. So back in 2021, Cook County updated its own residential landlord tenant ordinance that went into effect June 30th, 2021. Around that time, it was brought up to the Housing and Homelessness Commission that perhaps we should update our own RLTO. Since then, we've gotten a number of referrals from council members that relate to updates to the RLTO. We've also updated our fair housing ordinance. And then finally, just earlier this month, we checked in with a number of community partners like LCBH, Open Communities, CAFA, and MTO to get their feedback and input on some of the things that we talked about with the commission back in 2021. And so now we've got a whole list of things for you guys to consider. So the proposed updates that we previously discussed with the committee generally center around the ways in which landlords collect fees from tenants, disclosures and notices, and then some other kind of standalone things like creating consistency around the period to cure and adding a one-time right to pay and stay. And then we also have since asked you guys to consider some referrals from our council members. One of those is just cause convictions, in which we would consider limiting no fault evictions, giving fair notice for rent increases, and being sensitive to the amount of time someone has lived in their unit, and then considering faster security deposit returns. In addition to these things, we are also asking you guys to consider looking into a low barrier compliant tenant screening, which is basically just making the screening process for tenants easier to comply with. Since Cook County updated its just housing ordinance, looking into a landlord mitigation fund, first right of refusal, and right to organize. So we took a look at the city of Evanston's current LTO regulations that we have on residential condominiums, the fair housing ordinance that we updated recently, Evanston's model lease, and our nuisance ordinance, and compared it to that of Cook County's RLTO that they recently updated, the city of Chicago's RLTO, which is also recently updated, and the proposed city of Chicago just cause ordinance. And that is how we developed the memo that we sent out to you guys. So we're hoping that you guys will have some room for discussion around adding some of those things into our RLTO.
Great. Okay. Well, we have a question from Ugo to start us off, or a comment.
My initial question was if we could ask questions during the presentation or wait till the end. I guess we waited until the end. So, you know, unfortunately, the document that we received, we didn't receive it until Friday evening, and I had a pretty full house weekend. And today I was at a class for 6 hours, still trying to do some work in between. So I didn't have much time to read in depth what was sent to us, but it is of a big concern to me. And I partly agree with what Tina was saying on her presentation, or her comment to our meeting from last week, from last month mostly, but to the to the landlord tenant ordinance for Evanston. And I think that, you know, part of me is telling me that tenants deserve a better treatment because they have not been treated well historically in urban areas. And I don't know anything about rural areas. So I speak to what I have witnessed in the past. But I think that now, like every correction, it tends to bring the pendulum way to the other side instead of trying to achieve a balance, because there has been some imbalance prior to today. And I think that the way it is presented, and if you could go back to the first page, please, Lindsay, that'd be great, because I'm gonna need to refer to some of the comments here. And this took my entire screen. But where he talks about moving fees, I agree with what Tina said in terms of we don't have a requirement for tenants to have renters insurance. So in other words, instead of going from item to item, I would say that it would be good to have more input from the landlord side. There are two parties to this ordinance, and one is tenants and the other one is landlords. And it seems to me very lopsided. I am all pro protecting the rights of human beings in general. It doesn't matter what the situation is, but it seems like he's taking away a lot of the protections that landlords also need in order to be in a healthy relationship with tenants. There are two sides, and I'm all for protecting the tenant, but it's also unfair to say $10 on a late fee when that $10 is going to translate for that landlord to fall behind on their mortgage. And I guarantee you 100% that is not going to be a $10 fee from their bank that's holding their mortgage. That's just one instance of what I see here. And I wonder, the organizations that Lindsay quoted that have participated into this sounded to me that they were predominantly tenant organizations. And I have not heard that there are landlord organizations that are also present at these conversations. So I think that we owe it to the population of Evanston in order to have a good balance in our society to talk to both sides of what this ordinance will affect. Landlords and tenants, talk to landlords also.
Mhm.
I can go to more detail of what I
Well,
briefly have seen, but I think that it'd be non-constructive to this meeting in particular.
Okay, but I think that's a very, very important point that you're making. And yeah, Marion, did you want to respond directly to?
Yeah, I definitely want to respond to that because I fully agree that this is meant to be a conversation and includes all parties. So we're coming to the committee with a list of kind of a grab bag or list of items that could be considered from the tenant perspective, local organization that have provided from the research that we've done as far as what exists in the local landscape, as well as outside of just locally. This initial conversation is meant to kind of give us an initial direction so that then we can really start conversation a little bit deeper, a little bit more focused. And we absolutely intend to have focus group and conversation with landlords and involve landlords that are a key part of the success of an update like that in the next couple months. This is an initial conversation. This is not meant to be a deciding discussion by any means.
Right, yeah, exactly. Councilmember Reed, did you have a comment?
If you don't mind me just saying, it's just kind of the structure that we have had is that this particular, your presentations come in and then next month we have to vote on that. That's kind of the modus operandum of our committee. And that's why I'm overly concerned that this is next month we'll be voting on it. So it's good to know that this is just the door to a lot of discussions, I hope.
Right.
And I completely understand where you're coming from and why you would assume that, because it has been in some cases when it's a small project or different project, that's the case. In this case, we're not planning to come back to the committee for at least a couple months. So there's this initial conversation. There's going to be an update next month, and then the plan would be to come back to the committee at the April meeting. This is a large project and it does deserve a little bit more time.
Yeah, and if we're not ready in April, then we'll continue the discussion until we are comfortable making, because once we make the changes, then it will be our ordinance that will operate under for, several years, well, a few years anyway. So we want to get it right. Yep. Lauren, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I agree with everything. Oh, yeah, I agree with everything that Ugo has said and what you all have said. And just thinking down the road, I do agree that framing wasn't made clear in the beginning that this is a starting point. And I do think it would be helpful ultimately once we start trying to piece this together, if we could sort of have the material presented as sort of, here are things when you're thinking about protecting tenants, here's a set of recommendations when you're thinking about protecting landlords, and here's where we see some obvious overlap or opportunity for sort of agreement that's pretty low hanging fruit. Like, I think some of the things you all put on here are pretty obvious, like we should all be in favor of transparency, right? Like there's some, like this is a huge gamut in terms of how controversial these would or wouldn't be. And I suspect the same will be true from getting landlords. So I agree with Ugo, both in terms of maybe just in the future with big things like this, framing it up that you don't have to, we're not going to ask you to vote tonight. We recognize we need to get this information from this other critical party. And it would be helpful, I think, to me to see it that way when we do get to that point.
Great. Okay. Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I just want to note that I appreciate the discussion that's been going on this far. I do appreciate Ugo bringing up the landlords. I do want to highlight that, we have, residential rental providers on the call, on the committee, and we hear from that group quite often. We sometimes do not hear, or most of the time, we do not hear from tenants. And so I just want to, thinking about what was requested from Lauren just a second ago, which was that we'd have a list of, here are the updates that are for tenants, here are the updates for that protect landlords. If we're going to do something like that, I'd also want us to think about, the power dynamic and what are the rights that property owners already have and maintain, if we're going to create a list like that. But lastly, to move forward with the discussion, I really like the 10 bullet points. I think a lot of those, I think all of those make sense for updates. They already are in the Cook County code. It makes sense for us to be in alignment with, the rest. In most cases, makes sense for us to be in alignment with the rest of the county. I think the 10-day versus 5-day exemption makes sense here. And then of course, I made the referral, so I just advocate here that we also include the just cause eviction updates to our, whether it be as a part of our residential, whether those principles are worked into our residential landlord tenant ordinance, or whether those updates are, an adjoining but separate ordinance, whichever way makes sense. I would support us moving those forward conjointly.
Okay, great, thank you. Joanne?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my camera doesn't work. So yeah, I agree with all it said. I mean, I agree with Hugo that, are we moving for too much protection for tenants and not enough for landlords? At this point, I'm really not in favor of a just cause eviction. I think we need to take our time with this to get it right and not feel we have to rush through everything, because landlords, they're the one who's made the financial investment. And I mean, I've had some bad tenants, and stuff. So it can be frustrating time, and Tina has sure had more than her too much experience with problem tenants, so I think we should just take it slowly.
Okay, Lauren?
Yeah, I don't want to sidetrack us, so by all means, tell me if this is a separate conversation, and hopefully this is not an inappropriate thing to say, but one, I was really compelled by what the very first public comment was, and I would ask we add that to the list of things to consider. Both points she made about being allowed to call the police and have your locks changed. And then, I think Councilmember Reed's point is a really good one about power dynamics, and maybe this is for a different day, but I'd really love to think about what we do about that. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying we're moving too fast to protect tenants. I actually tend to think those protections are really needed. I just do think it's important to recognize both sides have valid needs. And so the power dynamic is not level. I absolutely agree with that. Although I do think that there is less power, the smaller the landlord in some respects. So I don't know, maybe Councilmember Reed, that's something to think about offline, but I totally hear you and I don't know what to do about that. And I think it's a really important point.
Great, thank you. Ugo?
Thank you. Just wanted to add that I'm really happy to hear that this is just the beginning of a conversation, and wanted to also tell Tina that I have had Section 8 tenants. I am a complete advocate for all the people that I work for, other landlords, to have Section 8 tenants or voucher holders, as we call them today. Is that I think that I'm totally in agreement with Councilmember Reed and with what Lauren have just said, that there has been an imbalance and it has been lopsided for historically for too long. And this is a good time for us to come to a good balance solution that is not going to just upset one side of the relationship that we have here between landlords and tenants, but it is to create a balance where everybody feels that they do have a good footing to enter into this relationship. It is very hard to be a good landlord. It is probably horrible to be a bad landlord. I don't know, and I hope that I will never find out, but it's a work. It's another job, and most people have this as a side job. So making sure that you have a good tenant is part of your responsibility to your business. And it sounds to me like some of these issues might take away that ability from landlords to find a good tenant. And a good tenant could be somebody absolutely that has a voucher, that has a Section 8 subsidy for whatever reason, and other things. And I'm trying to always come to help the small guy. And that's part of why I'm in this committee and taking my time to be here. So glad to hear that.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Hadakatis.
Yeah, I just like to second that. I had not thought of domestic violence tying into this landlord tenant ordinance. And so I just want to second that. I think this is something we should also research and definitely, moving forward, bring it into our discussion. I think, for me personally, I think it makes a lot of sense to align with either Cook County or Chicago as closely as possible, just so that there's, we're not a huge outlier with some of these things. I do think one thing, I think we can do the tenant protections without making it punitive towards housing providers. I think would be, one way where we could move forward without having this be a us versus them kind of situation.
Yeah, great, thank you. Councilmember Burns.
Thank you, Chair. Don't have any specific comments yet in terms of any of the items. I'm looking forward to listening more so this meeting and taking some more time to look through everything. I do want to encourage us to think about this differently than balance. When I hear balance, I hear, oh, anytime you do something for one side, you got to do something for the other, as if this is some collective bargaining negotiation, right? Like at the end of the day, I think what should guide this working group, whether we're thinking about landlords or tenants, is what's fair, what's just, what makes sense. Mm-hmm. And that may not be that may not mean that every time we do one thing on this side, you got to do another for the other one. So I don't think balance is the right word to guide this. And then I definitely don't think slow is the right word that we should use. Yes, we want to be thoughtful. To me, we want to be deliberate. We don't want to be slow, because there is urgency around this. People on this call, including myself, may not be feeling it, but there are many people, landlords included, that for whatever reason, either because you're near displacement or have already been displaced, or for a landlord, as Ms. Payton described, have a really terrible situation that you're in that is creating a loss of income that's affecting you. Like this is an urgent issue. And so I want us to be careful on the words we use to guide this work. Again, not balanced, but just fair, what makes sense, not slow, but deliberate, thoughtful, but not slow. And that's all for now, Chair. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I just want to note one last thing. I believe, and Councilmember Burns, or maybe Director Flex can correct me, but I believe the issue regarding domestic violence victims and, quote unquote, crime-free ordinances is more connected to our nuisance premises ordinance. Is that correct? And I believe that our nuisance premises ordinance has those protections in place. So I guess, if folks are interested in moving that discussion forward, I think consulting our nuisance premises ordinance makes sense for that.
Okay, yeah, Sarah, do you have a comment there?
I do. I think that we have some of those protections, but there have been some that have been detailed more recently that I think we do need to look at. Ours was done in, I think, 2012. And so have been some additional legislation that I do think we need to look at, including the Illinois state law that was referenced, to make sure that we're aligned with that, because I believe we have to be, right, other things, but I do think there may be some elements that we don't have that have been brought forward.
Yeah, no, we certainly want to look into that, though. Yeah. So Councilmember Burns, you still have your hand up. Do you have another comment, or?
I do not. Let me put that down.
Okay. Thanks, right. So you all staff are going to be talking with our landlord community to get more input from them. And that, do you have enough input from us for a first go around tonight, or are there some of these in particular that because we've not really, I mean, we've basically said, oh yeah, that short list, the list of about 10 items, that looks pretty good. We've not really delved into the more, the newer, more complicated issues that were mentioned in the memo. Are there ones in there in particular that you'd like our feedback on?
So I guess I would want to make sure that the committee is, and this isn't a vote, but at least getting an understanding of whether the initial bulleted list / one pager items, the one that are most closely matching what's existing with Chicago or County, if there's any items that caught committee and members' attention, or where there's maybe some discussion that we want to have, or items that require additional research. I would like to get that feedback. And then as far as the remainder of the items, I'd be interested to understand where the committee is at least at an initial thought around some of the items that were mentioned under the just cause eviction, but also any other items on the list, just so we have an understanding of whether we should consider the full list of what's been presented, or if there's some questions or some background that the committee would like to hear to keep this conversation going, or anything else really. So
great. Okay, well, we have some hands up. So Councilmember Heracles.
I can explain my two referrals that are kind of being wrapped into this discussion. The fair notice, when I first got on council, something I'd looked up, and I just it's mirroring Chicago's fair notice, and I think I would want it to be at least mirror Chicago. I do hear from people, and I've had the experience where you find out, oh, I have to move in 2 months, and like realistically, even 60 days notice for a short-term renter is a huge burden, especially with rising rental costs. I know a lot of housing providers don't do this, but you do hear stories about like, well, rent's going up, so they terminated my lease and I can't find something now. So I would want that to stay at least, give it as much notice as Chicago does to their tenants. Maybe we could bake in something that maybe for very long-term renters, that it's a little bit even, once you're there for like past 5 years, that's a pretty big shock if you have to move. The second one, the security deposit piece, I just heard from a few people, the situation would be that I'm moving out and my housing provider said, I'm getting my full deposit back. Why am I waiting this long if there's nothing wrong and I did a great job of being a good tenant? So that wouldn't, maybe cut off a week or so. A lot of the security deposits at this point are pretty big, and so a lot of middle class families waiting for $3,000 to come back is a big deal for them. So that's kind of where those two, what my thinking was on those.
Great, thank you. Ugo.
Thank you. Just wanted to ask Marion, Anna, or Lindsay if you have a hold of the Chicago Landlord Tenant Ordinance itself, because I remember that my office had a very hard time finding that document. There are lots of summaries going around, floating around, put on the back of leases and stuff, but the actual full, complete ordinance, it's not an easy document to come by. That's one. Councilmember Jerkaris mentioned the Just Housing Initiative, and that is more of a screening of tenants tool that the city of Chicago has made now into two steps. First, you approve your tenant on a financial basis. Once it's determined that the tenant is qualified to rent that apartment, then you go to the second phase, which is criminal backgrounds and any other kinds of checks that you might run, which are also have been recently limited to 3 years. So even a convicted felon that his service of that sentence or that sentence, let's leave it at that, was 5 years ago, you cannot bring that up as a hold to renting to that particular person, which I'm all in favor of all these things, and I think it's very good that things are moving in a more fair direction. But it'd be good to have, if we're comparing what Evanston has currently, what Cook County landlord tenant ordinance is, and what Chicago landlord tenant ordinance is also, if we're gonna make those comparisons, it'll be good to have the actual full document so we can get a good sense of that. And that in itself is gonna take us a good while. Even if we do it deliberately and as fast as we can, it's gonna take a good while because it's a lot of a document. And we're talking about 3 of those that we're gonna try to compare to each other.
And I can maybe answer that. So I'm happy to provide any full documentation. I do want to mention that some of that work is being completed with the help of our local partners as well. So as part of this process, reviewing the different ordinances and putting that into pretty detailed spreadsheet and understanding what the difference were between the two, and then getting to that one pager document that was part of, I believe, part of the packet that highlighted what the key items that were main differences that were opportunity for potential updates, and then providing some context around how that compared to Chicago or Cook County. That was a way for staff to provide that information in a digestible way that is not requiring the committee to redo all the work and go into a very large amount of details in something that could become a full-time job, to be honest.
Yeah, it's pages 13 and 14 in our packet. It has a very nice chart that, explains sort of the relationship of these various proposals to what's in Cook County's and Chicago's ordinances. So.
But we're also happy to provide additional context and deeper information if that's something that Ugo, you're interested to review as well. I'm more than happy to share more.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Sarah, did you have another answer for that, or should we go to Laura?
I did. I just wanted to point out very quickly to everybody that the just housing ordinance that has already been added to our fair housing ordinance. So we have to actually help people implement that. And that is one of the reasons we floated the idea of having a system, some kind of service that could help do some of that screening for landlords, if especially if that could be of help, because that was added to our fair housing ordinance last fall, and we have to implement it along with these other changes. One of the things we didn't want to have happen is to do a whole lot of individual separate changes to multiple ordinances that would be, I think, just absolutely confusing and drive the landlords, crazy, because I mean, how can you implement multiple changes sequentially? And so that's one of the other reasons we're trying to pull everything together.
Great.
Whatever we are going to do, let's try to get it all, whether it's in, as I think Councilmember Reed said, whether it's in a separate ordinance in some cases or not, but even things like lease riders that explain something or references, I think are very important, because it's really hard to keep track of all the different piece parts.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Lauren.
Well, I was just going to answer Marion's question, which is that I thought the information provided was very useful, and I didn't have any follow-up questions. And I feel like this is a good set for us to consider, as I said, with the addition of the public commenters, the first commenters. So no, I felt like this was the right level of detail. I didn't feel any need for follow-up information. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, no, I agree. So any more input for our staff here? And I'm sure you would be happy to receive any email further comments in the days ahead if we.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Any feedback is appreciated. Especially if, the committee has a little bit more time to absorb some of the information and wants to be able to provide feedback. Yeah.
Right.
More than happy to receive either phone call to discuss or email.
Right, great. Okay.
And we will be
Mhm.
trying to get a broad range of landlords involved in the conversation and get feedback. And so if any of you know landlords, I mean, obviously we have some landlords who come to every meeting who will of course be invited, but if there are others that people know who might be good to get involved, we have our list, but sometimes it helps if you tell us who might be a good person and we can invite them on a more personal basis than sending out an email or something.
Right, yeah, great, okay. Well, this is obviously just our first go around on this topic, and we'll have further in-depth discussion in the next couple of meetings ahead. So we have another meaty topic now, which is basically every 3 years we need to review and update our inclusionary housing ordinance. So now we're getting started on thinking what that update might look like. And we had information in our packet. Is there a presentation before we start discussing it? There we aha.
Hi, everybody. And I'm going to start well, first of all, I wanted to thank Dominic Voss and John Raffersberger that joined this meeting to be there in case there was any deeper question. I just wanted to thank them for joining the meeting. There was no question, but thank you for coming. Before we move on to the next topic, I'm going to start the presentation for the inclusionary housing ordinance update. We also have Melissa Klotz, the zoning administrator, that is with us tonight. That's going to provide the bulk of the update when it gets to the more technical zoning bonuses and calculation of the IHO.
Okay.
And I think just before I start, I want to make sure, Melissa, are you here and able to speak and have the right?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Awesome. Thank you. So the inclusionary housing ordinance has been implemented with several different iteration, started a while back. Initially in 2007, we had the IHO for sale developments only with a smaller fee in lieu per unit. It was revised as a much meatier version in 2016 and included rental and for sale developments at the time and included some fee in lieu per unit. There's since been an update in 2019, which was that second iteration of that meatier version of the inclusionary housing ordinance, and something that the version that most likely you're on the committee more familiar with. The summary of the updates were highlighted in the memo, but one of the update was the way of calculation, simplifying the calculation, and the increase in the fee in lieu per unit to ensure that we got more on-site unit versus fees being paid, just so that it could produce additional units, affordable units in the community. And then in the ordinance, there is a regular update that's included to make sure that the IHO requirements are in line with the needs of our community. So this is the time where we're once again reviewing where we're at with the IHO, how it's working, and providing suggestion on potential updates so that it works well for everybody in the community. Next slide, please. So for those that are not extremely familiar with the current inclusionary housing ordinance, there's some key components. There's some technical details, so sometimes it's a little bit hard to summarize just on one slide in key bullet points. There's always a little asterisk here, or depending on certain factors, but at the high level, this is an ordinance that applies to residential and mixed-use development of 5 or more units, and usually requires a minimum of 10 to 20% of affordable on-site units, depending on the type of financing that is used, 10% being the minimum number for privately funded development, 20% if it involves any kind of public funding. There is alternative and other way to meet those requirements, but at the top level, 10% and 20% are kind of the numbers to remember here for the current IHO. For rental development, the affordable maximum income is 60% of area median income. So the units are supposed to be affordable, are meant to be affordable for households that are at or below 60% AMI. For ownership, it's currently at 100% of AMI. The fees in lieu are updated based on the consumer price index every year, and they currently are the ones shared on your screen. They're depending on location, whether it's a downtown or research park area, or whether it's just the rest of Evanston. There's some waiving of permit fees based on the, I think it's based on the square footage of affordable units, but essentially there's lower permit fees for buildings that provide affordable units, and they're also deferred. The affordability period of the affordable units currently is 30 years for rental units, 99 years renewable for ownership. The affordable units do not require parking, so that counts when there's in the calculation that Melissa is going to go over. The IHO units are also located throughout the buildings. They cannot be clumped into one corner. They cannot be just specific only studios. They have to match. If there's a certain number of units of 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom or studios, it needs to follow kind of the same ratio. And then as far as the benefit, the buildings that are meeting the IHO requirements are receiving a certain number of construction/zoning bonuses that is going to be detailed in the next slide that Melissa is going to go over, since we're going to discuss the technical details at the very high level of potential changes to be made. So this is a meaty conversation, so stay with us. This is an initial conversation. This is the first time we're going to be talking about this. So tonight we're talking about kind of the higher level of and the key component of what the IHO, how the IHO works. There's additional items to consider, which are listed on your screen here that I'm going to go in detail. But there's also, keep in mind that this is the first conversation. We're going to go over some more minute details and items that we could potentially layer on in a further conversation, but we wanted to start with something, and we're starting at a higher level. So the additional items to consider for this this review are a couple things. First, there's been some recent state of Illinois affordable housing property tax incentives that have been put in place. They're for developments of 7 or more units, and they have different levels depending on, and different level of benefits depending on the number of affordable units that a developer is providing. The thresholds are 15, 20, and 35% for Evanston. So it's something that we wanted to make sure we include in our considerations, because of course, if we're able to somehow align some of what we do with those tax incentive requirements, then we're able to leverage this benefit to make sure that the development that we're seeing are getting the best amount of affordable housing units for the community. So that's something to consider. I believe I provided a high level summary of how those tax incentive are working and how they're set up. Some of the calculation are a little bit difficult to understand because the 15% versus the 20% is calculated slightly differently based on assessed values and reduction in assessed value versus other type of reduction in timing. But I wanted to provide that context for you. The 20% level is only available to low affordability areas, and unfortunately, Evanston does qualify for that. So that those are some of the tools we specifically focused on. The second item that we are looking at is Chicago has recently updated their own version of their IHO. So we review what they put in place to try to understand how that was working. Their setup is quite complex. It's got a tier system. It's based on different type of neighborhoods. There's a lot of factors, but at the very, very high level, if we're looking at comparable neighborhood to Evanston, they've set an affordability minimum at 20% for 60% AMI units. There's a number of different kind of flexibility and alternatives that are possible, but just to keep that in mind is helpful. Next slide, please. And then Melissa is going to take over to describe the IHO technical details for us.
Okay.
Thank you, Marianne, and hello, everyone. Melissa Klotz, zoning administrator. We last talked about IHO zoning bonuses a few years back, and it was quite a complicated thing, and largely because we were looking at establishing bonuses that were correct for development based on projects that had already been approved. And it worked out really well, other than it's really hard for everyone to follow. So this time around, what we've done is mostly tried to simplify it so that we are getting the same end result or slightly better, but in a way that everyone can follow and is much more intuitive. And in doing so, we should be able to get quite a bit more affordable housing overall. So if you look at our current bonuses that are shown on this slide, this was based on 10% on-site affordable housing, which was not required. Only 5% was required on-site, but because of how the bonuses played out, and especially with rounding, most developments did choose to go for these 10% bonuses. So you can see with our current bonuses, for instance, in the downtown, the density allowed 4 market rate bonus units for every 1 affordable housing unit you had, which is a great thing, other than the end result on paper kind of looks a little bit funny, because it's starting to show up that it looks like developments are gaining 30 and 40 bonus units. So while it did achieve that correct end result, it was a little bit strange in just how much density bonus was given. Besides that, the thing that worked really well was the reduction in parking. And as things are evolving, it looks like we are still overparked on these projects. And the parking is one of the things that developers are constantly saying costs a lot and ultimately leads to less affordable housing, less dwelling units overall. And they go through a process and get that parking further reduced. So if we want to go to the next slide. This kind of goes over, based on those bonuses, some of those things that I was just saying. Our method of calculating worked backwards before, and what that resulted in is for those 10% on-site affordable housing, we weren't actually getting 10%. In the end, counting bonus units, we were really ending up at somewhere between 7 and 8%. So if we now go to a method that doesn't work backwards, we could get those true percentages. And if we are able to move to a 15 or 20% on-site, we would truly be getting 15 or 20% of the total development as affordable housing. Another issue that we had with the current bonuses is that for smaller developments, ones that just barely fall into the category of requiring the affordable housing, it almost made them infeasible because that cost of the on-site affordable housing was not equaled out by zoning bonuses. So we have looked at needing to adjust that. And then ultimately, also going with the parking spaces, being that developments are still doing less parking than even what we are requiring by code and with all of the bonuses, we are still hearing it's just the parking is too expensive, it's not needed, and so we're not getting the best projects that we can from it. If we go to the next slide. This is proposed bonuses, and so this is going based on 15% on-site affordable housing, and that is a true 15% since we're now working forward. And so ultimately we're almost doubling the on-site affordable housing that we would be getting. Changes from our current bonuses are highlighted in gray, and one that probably significantly stands out is that it's showing for density that there would be no density requirement. Now, what this does is that takes away that goofy thing of seeing 30 or 40 bonus market rate units. And instead, it's going to what actually fits on the property that is acceptable. And if it is a very small project, it's going to be the rest of the zoning regulations that end up determining that, based on height, lot coverage, things like that. And then in, say, the downtown, where we really do want that big height and density, it's actually encouraging it appropriately. And if not appropriately, those would all be planned developments, so they would require city council to review them anyway and could bring them back into the realm of appropriate. Looking at the parking requirement, we are recommending changing to 0.5 spaces per dwelling unit rather than per bedroom. And that is still on par or slightly more than what current developments are being approved with by the city council. So we still believe that that's probably a little bit more parking than is necessary, but definitely within the realm of more acceptable to developers as well as the city. Besides that, we are showing to get rid of the height bonus for residential. That's only because the way it was previously written, you could get a 1-story height bonus, which you can also get via a planned development. And we had an either or, that you could not request it both ways. So really, by eliminating that bonus, we're not eliminating anything. We're just simplifying it. If we go to the next slide. So without working backwards, we have a couple of examples, and these are current in-process projects that may or may not come to fruition, but applying both our current zoning bonuses and then the proposed zoning bonuses, you can see what the differences are. So example number 1 is a small development, and overall they're requesting 9 units. So with our current 10% on-site affordable housing that is not actually 10% on-site, the requirement is that 0.7 units must be affordable. So that rounds up to 1 unit. And so what we are actually saying from a zoning perspective is that they're requesting 7 units, 1 of which is affordable, plus 2 bonus units. So that's where it gets a little confusing for everyone when it doesn't need to be. Looking at how we're proposing it, we would just say they want 9 units. Okay, 15% of 9 is 1.35 units, or if they want to go with the 20%, then that's 1.8 units. So it's just so much clearer, but you can see how for a smaller size project like this, you get the same end result or more affordable housing depending on how we want to do rounding. The other part of this is, since we are looking at parking that then goes based on dwelling units rather than bedrooms, we would not be discouraging bedrooms and encouraging luxury units that just have fewer bedrooms. So we could get more of what the community really needs. If we go to example 2, on the next slide. So this one is for a mid-sized project. This is basically the largest zoning project that does not trigger a planned development. So this is, you can kind of look at it as a worst case scenario. With the current 10% affordable housing, it was that the request was for 30 dwelling units and 3 needed to be affordable units. And then because of those 3 units, you could gain 6 bonus units. And I actually, now that I look at that, that's incorrect. This specific project, it was 2 affordable units on site and it's in the downtown. So it actually gains 12 bonus units. So you can start to see where those bonuses look strange. If you look at the 15 and 20%, then you would see that instead of gaining 2 affordable units, instead you could gain 5.4 units or even 7.2 units. In the end, it's the same project other than we get more affordable housing, and it would also trigger less parking, which this is a project that did go through the process and it received a parking variation to reduce its parking by a decent amount. So you can see better end result for everyone. If we go to example 3, it's an example of a large scale project. So this would trigger a planned development and would require city council approval anyway. So working it backwards with our current 10%, what we ended up with was that it was a request for 100 dwelling units. They provided 10 affordable units and gained 40 bonus units out of that. So that sounds really odd. Using our new way of doing it, we would more than double those on-site affordable units while also reducing the parking, which is exactly what the developer is requesting and heading to city council with anyway. So the other part of that parking reduction is that it just provides more of a known quantity to developers where they can know right off the bat that they don't need to have another entire floor of parking that costs X amount of money, and therefore they have to try to make up for that throughout their process, wondering if that'll happen or not. It's more predictability up front. With that, are there questions specifically about the bonuses?
Yeah, Lauren, is that a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm Lauren Berlin. They're very short, so I just have a couple of questions and I'll just say all of them and then maybe you can just fire off answers. One is, I don't really understand how you have, for example, 1.35 units or 1.8. So I'm wondering if you round down or round up. Could you just clarify the decimal idea with a unit? The second one is, and this is probably just my ignorance showing through, but there are a couple places where you say no parking on inclusionary units. So I'm trying to understand, does that mean like someone who's allowed to move into an inclusionary unit is like, hey, I got, a better deal on this unit, but I don't get parking? Or how do they figure out parking in that area? I guess I'll just ask those 2 questions.
Sure. Great questions. So first with the rounding, the way that it currently works is we round to the nearest half. So we're either going to round down to a full unit or up to a full unit. Marion, please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, that's right. And for the future, we're actually still discussing, that's part of the kind of next step. We want to understand better how the state of Illinois is also looking at the tax incentives and how they're doing their calculation to understand, especially when it comes to the smaller buildings between 7 and 14 units, how they're doing it. So we don't end up having 2 different way of calculating and no one understands anything.
Exactly. And that's why for these examples, they've been left as those decimal point units, since we're not sure what the best approach is at this point. But however we determine we want to round things, it really does impact those smaller projects.
Just a really quick point. The tax benefits are so new. Really, the first property that has been built or is in the process of being finished is a fairly large property in Fulton Market, which is, you probably know, is a very expensive market right now. And Related Midwest is building it and they're putting 20% affordable on site. So it clearly is motivating to developers And I'm going to send out an article. It was in today's Tribune about that. So one of the things that we've been very careful of is to try to, that's another reason for going with the actual percent being accurate. And Lauren, your point is very good. We just don't know yet because nobody has proposed small units that anybody's implemented that we're aware of. So it's a kind of steep learning curve.
And then if you can just explain the no parking on inclusionary, like how?
I can do that. They aren't required to have parking for those units. It doesn't mean that the people can't get parking. If nobody in Evanston is assigning parking with rental units in these new buildings. It's not like it's packaged with the rent. And we do not have a discounted rate at this time for the parking is totally separate. People can get parking. We did have a situation where we had a property that, well, we don't have enough parking for everybody. So can we just say that we can't offer it to the people with affordable housing? We said, no, they have to have a chance to get it too. They have to, they have to pay for it, but they can't be just automatically kept out of it. So we're trying to do that both ways.
So, and just to add, so when we're talking about parking, in your mind, you can make the distinction between what parking is available to renters when the project is finished versus what parking is required to be built as part of the project proposal. And those are the two different differences, essentially. Oftentimes when we're talking here is we're talking about the number of parking stalls or garages that are needed to be included for a project to be approved.
And is parking just expensive because the cost of land and it just doesn't cash flow the same way? Like,
yes. And I added a couple articles, but yes, essentially there's the construction cost. There's the fact that depending on the building, you may have to go down a couple floors. There's the structural cost. There's just, the fact that it's space that could be almost a unit in some cases.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Reed, you've had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I have, I'm really glad, Lauren, that you homed in on parking there, because that's where one of my comments really lies. And so I put in a referral for bonus reform quite a while ago. And so I'm really excited to see this, I'm sure this was on the minds of staff well before that referral, but really excited to see this moving forward. One of the things, before I get to parking, that I really would like to see that we would maybe mirror from the Chicago ordinance, Councilmember Burns and I, years ago, before we were council members, met with David Reithman, who I'm not sure if he's still the commissioner for the Chicago Department of Planning and Housing and Planning, whatever the department is, the commission is. But David Reithman used to head up that office. He's very familiar with folks here in Evanston who have been on the council for a while. And we met with his office, and one of the things that Chicago does with bonuses, particularly floor area ratio bonuses, is instead of providing, and we didn't really get into, or at least I didn't hear us get into this tonight, but I think our ordinance provides FAR bonuses for public benefits. Is that correct? Is that still in our ordinance?
A development can request a site development allowance to FAR, and the more site development allowances that are requested, the more public benefits have to be provided. Yes.
And public benefits can be things like divvy bike stations or parks or correct. And so what Chicago did is they realized, hey, those things just make the development more attractive in the first place. So that's good for your bottom line if you're putting in divvy stations, or if you're adding parks and you're adding these other amenities that are accessible to the public. And so what Chicago did was, we're trying to push people to build on-site affordable units, but we also need funding for our affordable housing fund so we can have a bit of so we can gain a bit of control and do things that respond more succinctly to the needs of our community. And so one of the ways Chicago did this, and I think we can do this, which is achieving more on-site units, but still providing a stream of revenue, is Chicago just charges directly for, instead of giving, those site allowances and other bonuses for public benefits, they just charge a flat rate for folks to get some of those benefits. And then that funding goes into, I think it's called the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, which is, essentially an affordable housing fund. So that's one. I would love us to look into, creating alternative streams of revenue for our affordable housing fund that could be supported by folks, instead of providing public benefits, just directly cashing out for some of that. And then on the topic of parking, parking is a huge cost of providing housing, and particularly it's a burden for providing affordable housing, as was noted earlier. And there are cities across the nation, I'm thinking some, a city fairly close to us and that mirrors us, Ann Arbor, Michigan, for example, and other cities where they are eliminating parking minimums across the board. And if anything, some communities are implementing parking maximums because of the productive space that we are losing to requiring infrastructure for cars, which are bad for the environment, is not a good benefit for the city. And aside from it, not being a great prospect for developers to have to provide more parking than is necessary, right? I think the private market can figure that out on its own. Also, having these large parking lots, whether it be for residential developments or commercial developments, really particularly, it's a loss to the city and it's a loss to our tax base, because those parking lots, particularly if they're separated from the project, are taxed at a separate rate, at a much lower rate than something that has a development on it. And so it's a loss for the city, it's a loss for the developer, and it's a loss for affordable housing. So to get to the point here, I would encourage us, I'd really love to see if there's a possibility for us, preferably to eliminate for these kinds of projects, for qualifying projects, parking minimums, and allow the private market to figure that out, or set the rate at, instead of 0.5, 0.25, I think would be a fair middle ground. And I think with that, we would, encourage, more folks to develop here. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Heracautis.
So I had a similar thought to Councilmember Reed, wondering about, my question was kind of around transit-oriented development, what we can change to facilitate, like he said, less parking. So I'll just leave that at that. One other thing I'd have, and maybe this is a whole deeper discussion as we get further along in this for staff, but some feedback I get from residents is affordable housing units, there's not very many for larger families. How we can facilitate 2 and 3 bedroom affordable housing units, and also things that lower than maybe 80% AMI, maybe having incentives for having even lower costs. So just things to think about for maybe next time.
Great, thanks. Joanne?
Yeah, I was wondering, could you explain this floor area ratio? And what bonuses they get?
Great question. So zoning, depending on the zoning district, either uses building lot coverage or floor area ratio. So building lot coverage is for residential districts, and it is simply the outline of all roofed structures compared to the total lot size. For commercial properties or mixed use properties downtown area, it uses floor area ratio, and that is basically the outline of all roofed buildings, but then multiplied by how many floors it is. compared to the total lot size. So it ends up being a number that means something in the zoning world. But overall, it's looking at just how much bulk, how much building is there on a specific lot. So if we are granting an extra 1.0 to floor area ratio, that means you could add enough square footage that is equal to the size of that specific lot.
Okay. And then do downtown buildings ever offer to subsidize spots in the parking garages, which are not fully utilized as far as I know? I mean, is that an option for some developers?
That is an option that is in compliance with zoning. Developers do not typically ask to do that, but it is when they're required to do that to meet the parking demand that either zoning requires or the city council approves or that their market demands. So if we truly had a parking requirement of 0, my expectation in the downtown would be that developers would not build their own parking because it costs roughly $50,000 per parking space to build, but that they would rent some spaces in a city parking garage, but not as many as we are currently requiring them to do.
Okay.
I do want to point out a couple things. We can look more at ways to potentially incentivize larger units, but there are some things, as Melissa explained, even changing the parking from a per unit, from a per bedroom to a per unit, I think is going to have a significant impact on that, because we've seen that, it's even like, oh, we're going to build a 2-bedroom with a den. Because they don't want to have the extra parking. So things like that. And I think that will give us greater flexibility. And we have always offered the option of providing a sort of equal discount off of an AMI discount. For example, if you were to have, 10 units at 60% AMI, if you actually offered units at 30% AMI, we would require fewer units because of the deeper discount. And that's something Chicago does as well. They offer that. It's really something that's hard to, when we had this second iteration of the Inclusionary housing ordinance, we had a kind of complicated, we had 2 levels of affordability and we had TOD area had 2 levels of affordability, and the rest of Evanston had 2 levels of affordability that were different. And it just made it so complicated that it was a nightmare, especially when you had to decide, well, this half a unit is going to go at which level? I mean, it just, the math just didn't work out. But there are, and we will talk to developers about that sort of thing. It also, this happens more on the, if there are deconversions from condo to apartments or vice versa, where you've got existing properties already. In some cases, their financing, there are lower cost sources of financing if somebody who's deconverting a building will have 20% affordability on site at 50% AMI. And that is a deal that works really well with the housing authorities to give more units that will easily accept vouchers, because vouchers are at 50% AMI. That's the maximum income. Of course, they still get paid differently for that, because it's not the tenant paying all the rent, but the rent is at 50%. So there are things like that we want to be able to accommodate as well. So that's the alternatives that we try to keep open.
Okay, Marian?
Well, I don't want to cut any discussion if other people want to provide conversation, but I do have a last slide around items we're considering in addition to just this high level that I wanted to go over. So this is like I was mentioning, this is the initial part of the conversation. We wanted to get the conversation going, get some feedback from the committee on some of the initial proposal, but we're also continuing to review other items to be layering in. One of the item would be how looking at currently non-covered developments and potential even kind of large scale renovation. We know that there's a certain level of affordability that's being reduced from very large renovation and rehabs being done to currently affordable homes that are becoming very large and potentially quite expensive within the community. We know that there's commercial currently that is not covered, commercial developments. There's other single family is not covered. So we wanted to review a little bit our options there and what could be considered. There's a penalty and non-compliance policy that could be potentially reviewed and improved in this version of the IHO that we want to take a look at. Chicago has done some interesting things there. We're also going to be reviewing exactly what Sarah was mentioning, kind of alternative equivalents and what that could be and how that can provide some flexibility so that we don't have necessarily quite the same level of complexity that the Chicago model is providing, where if you're reviewing the documentation, it's very easy to get lost. Part of the goal of this update is to make sure that there's clarity for all when we're reviewing what the IHO entails. The rounding calculation is mentioned here, but there's also the definition of what potentially a public benefit is. Right now, public benefit is a little fuzzy, so we wanted to kind of spend some time to review that and provide some clarity there. And I believe that was mentioned in the conversation before. And then, of course, we're going to review other items such as whether our fee and lieu are still appropriate, if there's any changes that need to be made, reviewing the affordability periods, what the IHO means for some of the maybe smaller projects that are for ownership and whether it's making sense. And then the incentive for larger units, whether there's something that can be done or not. There are complexity to that topic that's been brought up a few times. There's certain things around how a development is made and is built and kind of floor plans and things like that need to be taken into consideration, but we want to take a look at that. So just wanted to bring that up so that you understand that this initial part of the conversation is just one part of the IHO updates potentially, and we'll review other topics as well.
Okay, and so at our next discussion, then you'll provide more background about these various issues.
Right. The goal would be to come back to the committee with a proposal that's a little bit more full-fledged with layers and a little bit more complexity, but having this conversation in two parts is helpful to kind of get the core of the conversation discussed before we move forward any further.
Yeah, right, because it's a complicated topic, right?
It is.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah.
There's already been some discussion with developers, and I don't think we need to go quite to the level of formality that we had in our last go round. But again, it is important that we include developers in the discussion, just as we were talking about the importance of including landlords in the discussion of the RLTO. So we will be doing some of that too.
Great. Okay. Councilmember Burns.
Just wanted to thank staff for the work on this, and not sure exactly how to incorporate this, but just want to emphasize, I think the two goals of this work are, one, to of course try to incentivize or require developers to put affordable units into their new developments, but also as a way to increase our affordable housing fund. And so I'd love to incorporate that into this discussion, whether doing it, Councilmember Reed had an idea, one way to increase our affordable housing fund as part of this discussion, perhaps thinking about, and this was also, a part of the presentation that we just received, thinking about how IHO can tie into commercial developments. But I just want to uplift that. I think it's really important we continue to find ways, yes, to include as many of these affordable units in the planned development projects, but also the way we can bolster our affordable housing fund so that we can contribute to other projects around the city. And that's all, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, very important points, yeah. Well, the time is marching on and we do have a few more items on our agenda, so I suggest we move on to, we were going to be discussing a Fifth Ward alley for paving in 2024. Is that the right, am I got the right year there?
That is correct. It's the second alley for 2024. So you're discussing the selection prioritization of the alley. We're not discussing funding yet because it's for 2024. It's part of our effort to prioritize multiple alleys at once. So we're going to step through the end of the current consolidated plan and have our ducks in a row for funding for next year.
Okay, and the memo suggested that we consider the alley north of Simpson and east of Ashland. So I don't know, Councilmember Burns, would you like to make a motion on that and then we can discuss it?
Oh, do we need a motion on this? I don't have my agenda up currently. I am en route, but I guess I can motion a discussion on the 2024 Fifth Ward alley selection for CDBG funding.
Right. And the idea was, I guess it was the proposal is the alley that's north of Simpson and east of Ashland, if you have had a chance to think about that one.
Yeah, I don't know if staff is on the call. I don't see anybody that.
So there's no one for the alley, but a Councilmember Burns, I believe. So part of what makes it a little bit challenging, and this is an alley that was discussed last summer. We've been having, based on agenda items, we've been having to postpone this, but that was that's an alley that got your full approval from. That was an alley that was suggested by Chris Vanetta in Public Works. That's provided some update as far as which alleys could be prioritized and where we're at in the Fifth Ward, and then that was run by you back in August/September.
Yes, I think for this alley, one, I think because of the CDBG, this is, Fifth Ward, especially the 8092 census tract, but even 8093, I believe, is in a CDBG area. We've made quite a bit of progress on completing or improving unimproved alleys. And so I think this alley was identified due to I think some of the selections are based on are complaint driven, based on residents who have concerns. I think another part of it is alleys that have been historically difficult and somewhat costly for city staff to maintain. And I think this was one of those alleys identified as an alley that takes a lot of time and cost to maintain due to the heavy amount of trucks that use it on a regular basis. It's in the MXC zoning district. And so not only does it have residential use, but also heavy truck use from some of the businesses in the area. So, unless there was another alley that's come up, I was supportive of this alley being the next one in 2024.
Okay. So Councilmember Burns has made the motion to approve paving that alley. Is there a second?
Second.
And is there any further discussion? Then I guess could we have a roll call on the motion to approve paving the alley north of Simpson and east of Ashland in 2024?
Sure. Monica Bobo.
Aye.
Lauren Berlin.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez.
Aye.
Joanne Salome.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hirakaris.
Aye.
And Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Great. Okay, thank you. And then we have two annual reports, 2022 annual reports. First one from Metropolitan Tenants organization that was in our packet.
Yes, Marion, could you please share your screen?
Ooh, teeny tiny.
Oh, is it small? I'm so sorry.
Okay.
let me see if I can make it much bigger. Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, that's better.
All right. So the first report that we're going to be going over is for the Metropolitan Tenants organization. This is for their 2022 total calls. And in 2022, they had 384 calls total. The volume of calls was slightly lower than 2021. It decreased by 7.69%. The top reasons for calls are, again, leases, number 1, number 2 is evictions, and number 3 is maintenance. And this is the trend that we've been seeing year after year. These are the top 3 most prominent reasons for calls. Some good news is that calls regarding security deposit questions dropped in half. There were 24 calls in 2021, and there were only 12 in 2022. Also, maintenance calls were down 30%, with 86 in 2021 and 60 in 2022. The large majority of calls, or 96% of them, are still from tenants. And just some updates on administrative monitoring of the calls. We have implemented a process to log response time in Evanston 311 as requested in previous meetings and previous updates for the MTO. And we will be using the data in our monthly check-ins, and we'll also be using it to track progress on calls.
Do you know what concerns people are calling about as far as leases?
I do not, but I can get you that information if you'd like in an email.
And Councilmember Burns, is your hand still up from before, or do you have a new question?
It was, but I do have a new question.
Go ahead.
I don't know if I am recalling this correctly, but did they say they were also exploring some type of like online messenger capability or something like that? Have they made any progress on that?
Yes, great question. We just got news that they are working on the text feature that we had requested, and they are planning to roll it out at the end of Q1. So they're still working on that. And they've also sent a scope of work to the developer of the chatbot feature that will mirror the one that they use for Chicago. So they're working on both things.
Great.
Perfect. Thank you.
And just for context, so the texting tool, that's something that's a little bit easier to implement. So we're excited to see that happening soon. As far as the chatbot and kind of that digital integration, that would have some kind of automated features and document creation, things like that. That's something that's going to take quite a bit longer, but at the same time, since we are updating or at least looking to review updates to the RLTO, the timing works quite well because they can start the work while we review all that, and then it'll be much better to try to finalize that after a new ordinance is updated, so that we're reworking from the most up-to-date versions of the document and requirements.
Great.
All right. Any more questions for the MTO report?
Yeah, so Councilmember Burns, is your hand still up, or is it ready to come down?
It was ready to come down, but I actually have another question. So real quick, I just want to make sure I understand the differences between the two. So one, kind of the live messenger feature could involve kind of an automated feature, but also could involve a live person. And so I just want to make sure I understand what they're working towards. They're working towards more of an automated
So,
online messenger or something that can text people?
okay, so there's two different features. There's the texting service, which would allow MTO to be reached by text. Currently, they're only reachable via 311 or via their direct phone hotline. They don't really have a texting service. And one of the feedback we've gotten with other services is that a lot of people nowadays are more comfortable initiating contact with texting. So that feature is what they're implementing right now so that people can reach them by text, at least for the initial contact. Oftentimes, follow-up requires a conversation, but that allows them to potentially be reached easier by our residents and community members. The second
And then real
part-
quick, sorry to cut you up. That'll be a live person, live texter, not an
Yes.
automated response. Okay.
So there are some, and I'm going to be working with them because the texting services that they're probably going to choose has both features, and there might be some level of automated answer that could be possible, but that's going to be extremely limited. And really the point is for them to be reachable with a live person by text as a mode of communication.
Okay.
The website tool, which would be a chatbot, that's going to be something that would be accessible after hours, that would provide the kind of automated question that you all may have experienced when you're trying to reach, whether it's your utility companies, insurance company, or retail company, when you're chatting and there are answers that are tracking kind of your path through a workflow and potentially giving the opportunity for somebody to get answers to questions that are on the easier side of things automatically right away after hours, and then directing the more complex request to a live person. So that's kind of the chatbot, what the chatbot is currently doing in Chicago. Oftentimes is allowed by answering a few questions to potentially hear more about what a tenant or a landlord right and duties are. It can provide potentially templates of letters automatically, things that are kind of easy self-serve item that could resolve a good part of some of the easier requests that the hotline is getting.
Perfect, thank you. And I think I was just as a random side note, I think Expedia also, if we're looking for other models, has that. I just used that for a trip.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it
It's
worked
very,
well.
very common in the private world.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so if there are no other questions, we'll go on to the Community Partners for Affordable Housing report. So there is a total of 679 households currently on the wait list. 119 of those households were added since July 1st of 21. Which constitutes an increase of around 20% in 6 months. This is the biggest increase since July of 22 by percentages. In the 51 through 60 AMI income level, it increased 63% or 26 households. And by the 31 to 50% AMI income level, it increased 111. And 1/3 of them are in the city of Evanston. 74 of them are households below 50% AMI, including 101 that are below 30 AMI. So all of these renters would require either a subsidy or a majority subsidy, which means that the city would subsidize a majority of the rent, and it would change the rent to ability to pay ratio. 64% or 434 of households are individuals or families of two. And the household demographics of tenants who are accepted to share their ethnicity and race, 52% of them are African American, 38% of them are white, 11% of them are Hispanic, and 7% of them are Asian. As far as units available, there are 47 units available in total. Only 9 of them are available for households below a 50% AMI. 26 of them are available for households between 51 and 60 AMI. And 7 of them are available for households between 61 and 80% AMI. So any questions regarding the CPAH report?
Yeah, questions, anybody?
Well, what is this development at 2035 Dodge? I'm trying to picture that.
That's a very small, newer, it's not necessarily a development, it's new construction, but it's a very small development.
It's a
I think
two-flat.
yeah.
Is that the one on the corner or not?
No, it's on the alley.
Oh, okay.
And these are not officially from the inclusionary housing ordinance, but we have been very, in some cases where this developer wanted some site allowances. And so what we negotiated as a benefit for that was to have one of the units affordable. And it is a large unit. It is a 3-bedroom unit. For these particular, which they're not really the true IHO, we have tended to have slightly lesser requirements because, you know, when you have a two flat, it's really hard to have a deeply affordable. So the that unit is at 80% AMI.
Okay. Lauren, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, obviously it's a very strange labor market. We're in a kind of strange economy, but I'm wondering what's attributable to the super steep increase. I mean, beyond the obvious, if there's anything besides the pandemic, because you said it was in 2021, right? So I'm just curious if there's any, because that
You mean in the increase in the
demand,
in the wait list and in so
it just sort of everything we've been hearing from that period, or?
well, there's the fact that the program, I mean, we're continuing outreach and we're trying harder and harder to make sure that everybody's aware of the program. So there's that. The wait list is fairly recent. I think it's 3 or 4 years now. So it's still growing. There's been some specific outreach that was done in the last 6 months and library sessions. So there's that part. My inkling in the drop in the 0 to 30% and 31 to 50% is there's an annual income recertification that happens that updates the wait list, and usually that coincides with this update during the year. So there may be some people that dropped off from the wait list based on income or were able to get different housing, and then there's potential change in income where they may have changed from 0 to 30 to 31 to 50. We've seen that the total between 0 to 30 and 31 to 50, if you add both together, it only went up by about 10%, but there was a drastic increase on the 31 to 50 and a drastic drop on 0 to 30. So my inkling is some of them may have just shifted as well.
That makes sense. And is it, I know it's late and we're all tired, but is it cruel to for us to be aggressively marketing this given how long the wait list is?
So we talk about that often as far as the outreach and try to be specific. There is a long wait list, but you have to keep in mind that if you look at the screen right now, most of the units that we have available for this program are in sections that are in white. And in some cases, the outreach that was done recently has created a lot more wait lists for the units even above 80%. There was a lack of awareness. When we talk about affordable housing, there's sometimes a lack of awareness that there could be various income level available with this program. So we have to keep doing outreach we're trying to be realistic. There's also the fact that the wait list may be long in some cases, but not in others. This really depends on the timing of when the unit is available, the size of the unit, the situation at the time. And sure, there is a higher demand for the lower income units. But that doesn't, there's not like a specific, like, oh, there's 120 people in front of you. That's not quite how it works, because there's a local preference factor. So if you look at the total number versus the local preference factor, there's that as well. That plays a big part. So I personally want to keep doing outreach, because even if there is a wait, that gives us a gauge on how much there is a need.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I totally get it. I would, yeah,
Mhm.
that makes sense. That makes sense. It's unfortunate, but it makes sense.
Right.
Any other questions about this update? Okay, well, thank you. Then our agenda says staff updates, sort of in general.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have some general staff update I'm going to try to make quick. So number one, we are slated to get our grant amounts final grant amounts for 2023 on the 27th of February. So what that means is that will allow us to, if we get them on that date, that will allow us to update the 2023 action plan with final grant amounts and bring it back to the committee with final numbers and get it approved by City Council. We are currently working on the CAPER, reporting on the efforts that were made in 2022. That will be coming to you next month, and it will be posted Friday, March 3rd for public comment before it comes to you. And then I wanted to give a quick update on the one-stop shop. Initially, we were planning on an update for a one-stop shop at this meeting, but because we have delayed the signing of their agreement, the actual 6 months initial update is in April. That was my mistake. So I wanted to give you some update. They have started the advisory group in December. They've had 2 meetings already with the advisory group. There are, I believe there's 8 or 9 members. They are also going to be starting focus group from residents and landlords to gather feedback on the pilot. And they're starting reviewing which grants and alternative external source of funding could be available, and starting to look at applying for different grants, including one from EPA and one from the Department of Energy. So we'll have a lot more updates in April. They're slowly starting reviewing of building assessments and identifying buildings that could be eligible for the pilot to kind of keep building that business case. But I think by April, they'll have a meatier update on that topic. But I just wanted to give a quick glimpse on what's happening right now.
Great. All right. Well, a very full agenda, but it sounds like we're going to have an equally full agenda next month. So be prepared, be prepared. Right. Yeah. Okay.
I do want to mention that we're going to keep updating you on the landlord tenant ordinance progress. And while it's not necessarily going to be a topic of conversation next month, we will provide some updates and maybe some material for reading to kind of continue the conversation.
Great. Okay. Sounds good. So I think if no one else has anything else to bring to the group, I will call us adjourned for the night. And thank you all very much for discussing all these really heavy duty, important topics. So yeah, thank you very much to staff.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.